The morning sun was just beginning to rise over Atlanta's expensive Buckhead neighborhood when Special Agent Sarah Marshall parked her unmarked black sedan on Peachtree Street. At 34 years old, Sarah had earned her position as one of the FBI's top agents through hard work and determination. Her dark curly hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore simple clothes: black jeans, a navy blue t-shirt, and a light jacket, perfect for blending in while doing surveillance work. Sarah checked her watch, 6:45 a.m. She had been tracking a dangerous human trafficking ring for the past 8 months, and all signs pointed to a luxury house in this neighborhood being their base of operations. Today, she needed to observe who came and went from the targeted property without drawing attention to herself. Taking out her phone, she pretended to be just another person checking emails or scrolling through social media. But her trained eyes never stopped watching the large white mansion across the street. The FBI had received tips about expensive cars arriving late at night and young women being moved in and out of the property. Sarah's team suspected the traffickers were using the wealthy neighborhood as cover for their illegal activities. As she sat in her car, Sarah thought about her journey to this moment. Growing up in a middle-class family in Chicago, she had dreamed of working in law enforcement since she was 10 years old. Her parents, her father a high school teacher and her mother a nurse, had always supported her dreams, even when others doubted her. After graduating at the top of her class from Northwestern University with a degree in criminal justice, she had worked her way up through the FBI ranks, earning praise and respect from her colleagues. The sound of a garbage truck moving down the street brought Sarah's attention back to the present. She watched as a sleek black SUV pulled into the driveway of the target house. A well-dressed man in an expensive suit stepped out, looking around suspiciously before entering the building. Sarah quietly took photos with her specialized camera, making sure to capture clear images of his face and license plate. Subject entered the property at 7:05 a.m. She whispered into her small recording device. Male, approximately 50 years old, driving a black Cadillac Escalade, license plate number GTK 4589. The morning grew warmer as Sarah continued her surveillance. She occasionally stepped out of her car to stretch her legs or walk around the block, always keeping the house in view. A few neighbors passed by, walking their dogs or heading to work. Some gave her curious glances, but most paid no attention to the professional-looking woman who appeared to be working on her phone. At around 8:30 a.m., Sarah noticed more activity at the house. 2 more expensive cars arrived within minutes of each other. She carefully documented everything, knowing that every detail could be important for building their case. This was the kind of patient, detailed work that had helped her solve numerous cases throughout her 12-year career with the FBI. What Sarah didn't notice was Mrs. Peterson, a nosy neighbor who had been watching her through her living room curtains for the past hour. Mrs. Peterson, who prided herself on keeping the neighborhood safe, had already made 3 calls that morning to the local police about a suspicious person in a car. Sarah was just finishing her notes about the latest arrivals when she saw a police car slowly turning onto the street. She wasn't worried. She had dealt with local police many times before during surveillance operations. She had her FBI badge securely in her jacket pocket, though she hoped she wouldn't need to show it and risk compromising her undercover status. The police car pulled up behind her sedan, its lights flashing. In her rear-view mirror, Sarah could see Officer James Reynolds step out of his patrol car. Even from this distance, she could tell from his stance and the way he approached that this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation. His hand was already resting on his gun holster, and his face showed a look of suspicion that Sarah had seen too many times before. Little did Officer Reynolds know that his next actions would not only change his life forever, but would also spark a nationwide conversation about police conduct and racial bias in law enforcement. Sarah took a deep breath and prepared herself for what was about to happen, reminding herself to stay professional and calm, just as she had been trained. She had no way of knowing that the next few minutes would turn into one of the most challenging and significant moments of her career. Officer James Reynolds approached Sarah's car with heavy steps, his hand still resting on his gun. At 45 years old, Reynolds had been with the Atlanta Police Department for 15 years. He had a reputation among his fellow officers for being tough, but what they didn't say out loud was that he often crossed the line, especially with people of color. "Step out of the vehicle," Reynolds demanded, his voice harsh and commanding. He tapped on Sarah's window with his flashlight, even though it was broad daylight. Sarah rolled down her window calmly. Good morning, officer. Is there a problem? She asked politely, keeping her hands visible on the steering wheel. Reynolds' face hardened. I said step out of the vehicle. We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. His tone was filled with contempt, and he didn't bother hiding it. Sarah knew she had to handle this situation carefully. She didn't want to reveal her FBI status and risk ruining months of investigation work. Officer, I understand your concern, but I don't care what you're actually doing. Reynolds cut her off. Out of the car, now. He opened her car door aggressively. Sarah stepped out slowly, maintaining her professional composure. She was wearing her navy blue t-shirt and black jeans, nothing that screamed FBI agent, but nothing suspicious either. Sir, if you'll allow me to explain. Hands against the car, Reynolds barked, pushing her roughly toward the vehicle. You think you can just come into this neighborhood and do whatever you want? Several neighbors had come out to watch the scene unfold. Mrs. Peterson, who had made the calls, stood smugly on her front porch, recording everything on her phone. Other residents looked uncomfortable, sensing something wasn't right about the officer's behavior. Officer Reynolds, Sarah read his nameplate, speaking clearly and calmly. I am a federal. Oh, now you're a federal something? Reynolds laughed mockingly. Let me guess, you're some kind of important person who doesn't have to follow the rules. His words dripped with sarcasm and prejudice. Sarah could feel her heart racing, but years of FBI training kept her voice steady. If you check my jacket pocket, you'll find my credentials. Reynolds roughly patted her jacket, finding her wallet. But instead of checking it properly, he tossed it on the hood of the car. Sure, probably fake ID like all the others. By now, more people had gathered. Some had their phones out, recording the incident. Sarah could see her target house in her peripheral vision, knowing that her surveillance operation was being compromised with each passing minute. Listen carefully, officer. Sarah tried one more time, her voice firm but professional. You are making a serious mistake. I am requesting that you contact your supervisor immediately. Reynolds laughed again, this time louder and more dismissive. Oh, you're requesting now. Let me tell you something. He leaned in closer, his voice low and threatening. In this neighborhood, we don't take kindly to people who don't belong here, and you clearly don't belong. A young couple walking their dog had stopped nearby. The woman whispered to her husband, This isn't right. She's clearly professional and calm. Why is he treating her like this? Reynolds pulled out his handcuffs, making a show of it. Since you want to be difficult, we'll continue this conversation down at the station. Put your hands behind your back. Sarah knew this had gone too far, but revealing her identity now would create an even bigger scene and potentially alert her investigation targets. She made a quick decision to comply for now, knowing this would all be sorted out soon, though not in the way Officer Reynolds expected. As Reynolds roughly put the handcuffs on her wrists, Sarah noticed one of her fellow FBI agents watching from a distance. She gave a subtle nod, and he understood immediately. Document everything but maintain the cover. This was no longer just about their trafficking case. It had become something much bigger. Mrs. Peterson was still recording, a satisfied smile on her face, completely unaware that she was documenting what would soon become a national scandal. Officer Reynolds had just made the biggest mistake of his career, and the consequences would be severe. The morning sun beat down as Officer Reynolds walked Sarah to his police car, pushing her forward more roughly than necessary. Her FBI badge and wallet still lay forgotten on the hood of her car, ignored in Reynolds' rush to assert his authority. You know, Reynolds said loudly, making sure the gathering crowd could hear, we get people like you all the time, thinking you can come into nice neighborhoods and cause trouble. He opened the back door of his patrol car with unnecessary force. Sarah remained silent, her mind racing through protocols and procedures. She noticed more phones recording the scene, counting at least 7 different people capturing everything. Among them was Tommy Chen, a local news blogger who had just arrived and was live streaming the entire incident. As Reynolds tried to push Sarah into the back seat, she spoke up again, her voice clear and controlled. Officer Reynolds, I need to inform you that you're making a serious error in judgment. There will be consequences. Reynolds laughed harshly. Threats now? That's another charge we can add. He pushed her head down, forcing her into the car. You can explain all about these consequences downtown. A middle-aged woman stepped forward from the crowd. Officer, she hasn't done anything wrong. I've been watching for the past hour. She was just sitting in her car. Ma'am, step back. Reynolds snapped. This is police business. Don't interfere unless you want to join her. Sarah watched through the window as Reynolds walked back to her car. He carelessly gathered her belongings, not even bothering to open her wallet where her FBI credentials were clearly visible. He tossed everything into an evidence bag, then began searching her car without probable cause. Look what we have here, Reynolds announced triumphantly, holding up Sarah's specialized camera. Surveillance equipment, just as I thought. Criminal activity. The growing crowd murmured uncomfortably. Tommy Chen moved closer with his phone, making sure to capture every detail. Officer, he called out, don't you need a warrant to search her car? Reynolds turned sharply. Back up, all of you. This is an active crime scene now. He seemed to be enjoying the attention, playing up his role as the neighborhood protector. From the back of the police car, Sarah could see her target house. Two men had come out onto the porch, watching the scene with interest. She recognized one of them from FBI surveillance photos, a key suspect in their trafficking investigation. This confrontation was threatening to destroy months of careful work. Reynolds returned to the patrol car and got in the driver's seat. Comfortable back there? He asked mockingly, adjusting his rearview mirror to look at her. Maybe next time you'll think twice about coming where you don't belong. Sarah met his eyes in the mirror. Officer Reynolds, badge number 6389. She stated calmly, I want you to know that I'm memorizing every word and action you're taking, every second of this incident. Reynolds' face reddened with anger. Are you threatening a police officer? That's it. We'll add that to the charges too. He started the car engine. As they pulled away from the curb, Sarah caught a glimpse of her fellow FBI agent talking quietly on his phone. She knew he would be contacting their supervisor, Assistant Director Marcus Chen. Soon, very soon, Officer Reynolds would learn exactly who he had arrested. The drive to the police station was tense. Reynolds kept making comments about cleaning up the streets and keeping the right people in the right neighborhoods. Each word he spoke just dug his professional grave deeper. Sarah remained quiet, watching the streets pass by. She thought about all the cases she had worked on, all the real criminals she had helped put away. The irony of being arrested while working to stop a human trafficking ring wasn't lost on her. Several patrol cars had gathered at the station when they arrived. Word had spread quickly about Reynolds' catch of the day, and other officers came out to watch. Some looked uncomfortable at the sight of a well-dressed, professional woman in handcuffs, but none spoke up. Little did they know, across town, Assistant Director Chen was already in his car, driving fast toward the station. The next hour would change everything, not just for Officer Reynolds, but for the entire Atlanta Police Department. Inside the police station, Officer Reynolds marched Sarah through the main hallway like a prize trophy. Other officers looked up from their desks, some with curiosity, others with visible discomfort at the way Reynolds was handling the situation. Look what I caught sneaking around Buckhead this morning, Reynolds announced loudly, pushing Sarah forward. Trying to tell me she's some kind of federal agent. He laughed, and a few officers joined in nervously, while others turned away, focusing on their paperwork. Sergeant Lisa Martinez watched the scene with growing concern. In her 15 years on the force, she had developed a good sense for when things weren't right. The arrested woman's composed demeanor and professional appearance didn't match Reynolds' story at all. Reynolds, Martinez called out, maybe we should. I got this, Sergeant, Reynolds cut her off, steering Sarah toward the booking area. Let's get your fingerprints, shall we? He said to Sarah, his voice tripping with mock politeness. Sarah remained silent as Reynolds roughly pressed her fingers onto the fingerprint scanner. Her calm expression never changed, which seemed to irritate Reynolds even more. The booking officer, a young man named Officer Thompson, typed her information into the computer. Name? Thompson asked, looking uncomfortable. Before Sarah could answer, Reynolds jumped in. Put down Jane Doe for now. She won't give her real name. My name, Sarah spoke clearly, is Special Agent Sarah Marshall, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Badge number 27,845. Reynolds laughed again, but Officer Thompson's fingers froze over the keyboard. He had been trained to recognize when federal agents identified themselves, and something about Sarah's confident tone made him hesitate. "Sure, and I'm the president," Reynolds mocked. "Keep typing, Thompson. We'll add impersonating a federal officer to the charges." A young female officer approached with Sarah's evidence bag, which contained her wallet and badge. "Sir, shouldn't we check her ID?" Later, Reynolds snapped, taking the bag and tossing it onto a nearby desk without opening it. "Right now, we're booking her for suspicious activity, resisting arrest, and threatening an officer." Sarah noticed several officers exchanging worried glances. One of them, a veteran officer named Detective Williams, picked up his phone and stepped away, speaking quietly into it. Reynolds continued the booking process, making a show of taking Sarah's mugshot. "Smile for the camera," he taunted. "This one's going on my wall." Just then, Captain Roberts emerged from his office, his face serious. "Reynolds, a word," he called out. "In a minute, Captain. Just finishing up here," Reynolds replied, not even looking up. "Now, Reynolds," the captain's voice was stern. But before Reynolds could respond, the station's front doors burst open. Assistant Director Marcus Chen strode in, flanked by two other FBI agents. The room fell silent. Chen, known for his usual calm demeanor, looked furious. "Where is Special Agent Marshall?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the suddenly quiet station. Reynolds' face went pale. He looked from Chen to Sarah, then back to Chen. For the first time that morning, his arrogant smile disappeared. Reynolds stammered, but Sarah spoke first. "Over here, sir," she said calmly, still handcuffed. "Officer Reynolds was just about to check my credentials." Her voice carried a hint of irony that made several officers hide their smiles. Assistant Director Chen walked directly to Reynolds, his face thunderous. "Remove those handcuffs, now." Reynolds fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking slightly. As he unlocked the handcuffs, Sarah could feel him avoiding eye contact. "Special Agent Marshall," Chen said, his voice softening. "Are you all right?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, rubbing her wrists. "Though I believe Officer Reynolds has compromised 8 months of surveillance on our trafficking case." The color drained completely from Reynolds' face as the full impact of his actions began to sink in. Captain Roberts, now standing nearby, looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. "Officer Reynolds." Chen's voice was deadly quiet. "We're going to have a very long conversation about this morning's events, and I suggest you call your union representative. You're going to need them." The other officers in the station had stopped pretending to work, all eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. Reynolds stood frozen, realizing that his worst mistake wasn't arresting an FBI agent. It was letting his prejudice override his duty as a police officer. And this was just the beginning of his problems. The police station's conference room felt smaller than usual as Assistant Director Chen spread out documents across the table. Captain Roberts sat at one end, looking through Sarah's impressive FBI credentials, while Officer Reynolds slumped in his chair at the other end, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Chen said, his voice controlled but filled with anger. "You arrested one of our top agents during an active federal investigation, without checking her credentials, which were literally in your hand." Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The security camera footage from his body cam played on the screen behind him, showing his earlier behavior in vivid detail. Each moment made him sink lower in his chair. I thought she was suspicious," Reynolds mumbled, his excuse sounding weak even to his own ears. Sarah sat across from him, now wearing her official FBI jacket. She had just finished explaining how Reynolds' actions had compromised their trafficking investigation. The suspects at the house had been spotted leaving shortly after the arrest scene. "Suspicious?" Jen's voice rose slightly. "Special Agent Marshall has solved more cases in her 8 years with the FBI than most agents handle in 20. She was the lead investigator in the Martinez cartel takedown last year. She's received 3 presidential commendations." Captain Roberts rubbed his forehead, looking exhausted. "The department will face serious consequences for this, won't we?" "That's putting it mildly," Chen replied. He pulled out his phone and showed them the viral videos of the arrest. The clips had already reached millions of views on social media. #RacistCop and #JusticeForSarah were trending nationwide. The door opened, and Sergeant Martinez entered with a thick file. "Sir, I have Officer Reynolds' personnel record as requested." She placed it in front of Captain Roberts, who began reading with a growing look of concern. 17 complaints of racial profiling in the past 3 years? Roberts read aloud, his face darkening. How did these not trigger a review? Reynolds started to speak, but his union representative, who had arrived earlier, touched his arm and shook his head, warning him to stay quiet. Sarah leaned forward, her voice professional but firm. "Captain Roberts, this isn't just about me. How many other innocent people has Officer Reynolds treated this way? People who didn't have FBI badges to protect them." The room fell silent as her words sank in. Outside the conference room, other officers gathered, trying to peek through the blinds. The story had spread through the department like wildfire. "There's more," Sergeant Martinez added, pulling out more papers. "Social media posts from Officer Reynolds' personal account. Sir, they're not good." Captain Roberts scanned the printed posts, his face growing increasingly angry. The posts showed a clear pattern of racist comments and prejudiced views spanning several years. Reynolds' union representative cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could discuss some kind of arrangement." "Arrangement?" Chen cut him off. "Officer Reynolds didn't just arrest an FBI agent. He compromised a federal investigation into human trafficking. 8 months of work, thousands of man-hours, and most importantly, the lives of potential victims, all at risk because of his prejudiced assumptions." Sarah's phone buzzed. She checked it and looked up grimly. "Sir, our surveillance team confirms it. The suspects have cleared out the house. They're gone." Reynolds seemed to shrink even further into his chair as the full impact of his actions became clear. His career was effectively over, but the consequences would go far beyond just losing his job. "Captain Roberts," Chen said, standing up, "the FBI will be launching a full civil rights investigation into this department's practices. We'll need complete access to all personnel files, body cam footage, and arrest records for the past 5 years." Roberts nodded slowly, knowing he had no choice. "You'll have our full cooperation." Sarah gathered her things, ready to leave. She paused at the door and turned to Reynolds. "You know what the saddest part is, Officer Reynolds? While you were busy profiling and arresting me, real criminals were operating right under your nose. Your prejudice didn't just hurt me, it helped human traffickers escape justice." As she walked out with Assistant Director Chen, Reynolds sat motionless, finally understanding the true cost of his actions. His world had completely unraveled in just a few hours, and there was no one to blame but himself. 1 week after the arrest incident, the Atlanta Police Department faced a storm of public outrage. News vans lined up outside the police headquarters, and reporters camped out day and night, hoping to catch interviews with anyone involved in what they now called the Marshall incident. Inside his small apartment, Officer James Reynolds sat on his couch, staring at the TV. His face appeared on every news channel, alongside footage from his body camera and bystanders' phones. The videos had gone viral, with millions of views across social media platforms. In a shocking display of racial profiling, the news anchor reported, "Atlanta police officer James Reynolds arrested FBI Special Agent Sarah Marshall during an active federal investigation. Sources say the incident has compromised a major human trafficking case." Reynolds clicked off the TV and picked up the suspension letter on his coffee table. "Administrative leave pending investigation," it read in bold letters. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing with messages from fellow officers, some sympathetic, others angry at how his actions had brought scrutiny to the entire department. Across town, at the FBI field office, Sarah sat in a meeting with Assistant Director Chen and other agents, discussing how to salvage their trafficking investigation. "The suspects have completely vanished," Agent Thompson reported, pointing to photos on the screen. "They cleared out 3 safe houses within hours of the incident. We lost everything." Sarah nodded grimly. 8 months of work, gone in an instant. She paused, looking at new surveillance photos, but they made mistakes while rushing to leave. They left paper trails we can follow. Meanwhile, at the Atlanta Police Department, Captain Roberts faced his own challenges. Internal affairs investigators filled his office, going through years of records. The filing cabinets that held complaint reports against Officer Reynolds now sat open, revealing a pattern that should have been addressed long ago. 17 complaints of racial profiling, the internal affairs investigator said, shaking her head. 32 incidents of excessive force, all swept under the rug. Captain, this goes beyond one officer's actions. Roberts loosened his tie, feeling the weight of responsibility. We're implementing immediate changes, he explained. Mandatory bias training, review of all arrest procedures, and a complete overhaul of our complaint investigation process. Outside, protesters gathered peacefully, holding signs that read "Justice for Sarah" and "End Police Racism." Among them stood Mrs. Peterson, the neighbor who had called the police on Sarah. She held her own sign. "I was wrong. I'm sorry." Local community leaders met with police officials, demanding real change. Reverend Jackson, a respected civil rights activist, addressed the media. "This incident has exposed what many in our community have experienced for years. But now, with an FBI agent as the victim, nobody can deny the reality of racial profiling." Back at his apartment, Reynolds watched his phone light up with another message. This time from his sister. "Jimmy, what happened to you? This isn't how Mom and Dad raised us." He walked to his bedroom and opened his closet, where his police uniform hung neatly. 15 years on the force, and now his career was effectively over. But more than that, his actions had allowed real criminals to escape justice. At the FBI office, Sarah worked late into the evening, determined to rebuild the trafficking case. Her phone buzzed with another interview request, this time from a national news network. She had declined all interviews so far, focusing instead on tracking down the trafficking suspects who had slipped away. Agent Marshall, Assistant Director Chen said, entering her office. "The Civil Rights Division wants to talk to you about testifying before a congressional committee on police reform." Sarah looked up from her files. "Sir, I'm more concerned about finding these traffickers before they set up operations somewhere else." Chen nodded, understanding. "You'll be glad to know we just got a tip. One of their vehicles was spotted in Memphis. We're coordinating with the field office there." As night fell over Atlanta, the implications of Reynolds' actions continued to ripple outward. His case had become a catalyst for change, forcing many to confront uncomfortable truths about law enforcement and racial bias. The next day would bring more challenges: internal investigations, policy reviews, and public hearings. But for now, in different parts of the city, both Sarah and Reynolds lay awake, thinking about how one morning's events had changed everything, not just for them, but for an entire community. 3 weeks after the incident, Officer James Reynolds sat nervously in the police department's main hearing room. The room was packed with department officials, lawyers, and media representatives. This was his disciplinary hearing, the moment that would officially decide his fate. At the front of the room, 5 senior police officials sat behind a long table, reviewing the evidence against him. The largest screen on the wall displayed a damning timeline of his career: complaints, incidents, and finally, the disastrous arrest of Special Agent Marshall. Officer Reynolds, the head of the review board, spoke, her voice firm and clear. "We have reviewed all evidence, including your body camera footage, witness statements, and your complete service record. Would you like to make a final statement?" Reynolds stood slowly, his hands shaking slightly. The confident, arrogant officer from 3 weeks ago was gone. I know I made a terrible mistake," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Suddenly, the door opened, and Sarah Marshall walked in, accompanied by Assistant Director Chen. The room fell silent. She wasn't expected to attend the hearing. "Special Agent Marshall," the board chairman acknowledged. "We weren't aware you would be joining us." Sarah took a seat near the back. "I believe it's important to witness the process of accountability," she said simply. Reynolds continued his statement, now looking even more uncomfortable. "My actions weren't just wrong, they were harmful. I let my prejudices cloud my judgment. Because of me, dangerous criminals escape justice." In the back of the room, Captain Roberts watched with a grim expression. His own position was now under review for failing to address Reynolds' previous complaints. Next to him sat Sergeant Martinez, who would soon take over as acting captain. The head of the review board picked up a document. "Officer Reynolds, your actions on that day violated multiple department policies. But more importantly, they revealed a pattern of behavior that cannot be ignored." The room tensed as she continued. We have evidence of 17 documented complaints of racial profiling, 32 incidents of excessive force, and numerous social media posts showing clear bias. Reynolds stared at the floor as each piece of evidence was read aloud. His union representative sat silently beside him, knowing there was nothing left to argue. Furthermore, the board member continued, "Your actions compromised a federal investigation into human trafficking, potentially endangering lives and allowing criminals to escape justice." Sarah's phone buzzed quietly. She checked it discreetly. An update from her team tracking the trafficking suspects in Memphis. They were getting closer, but precious time had been lost. The board chairman cleared her throat. Based on the overwhelming evidence, this board has reached a unanimous decision. Officer James Reynolds, you are hereby terminated from the Atlanta Police Department, effective immediately. Your pension will be reviewed separately, and all cases you've handled will be subject to review. Reynolds slumped in his chair. Though he had expected this outcome, hearing it officially made it real. But the board wasn't finished. Additionally, the district attorney's office will review this case for possible criminal charges related to civil rights violations. You are required to surrender your badge and weapon before leaving the building. As Reynolds handed over his badge, Sarah stood up to leave. She had seen what she needed to see. At the door, she paused and turned back. "Mr. Reynolds," she called out, her voice professional but firm. "I hope you understand that this isn't just about me. This is about every person you've wrongly profiled, every life you've impacted with your prejudice. The badge means serving everyone equally, something you forgot long ago." After she left, reporters rushed to get statements from everyone involved. The evening news would lead with headlines about justice being served, but the story was far from over. Later that night, at the FBI office, Sarah sat with her team, planning their next moves in the trafficking case. They had lost valuable time, but they weren't giving up. "We've got fresh leads in Memphis," Agent Thompson reported. "And something unexpected. Other officers from different cities are coming forward with similar stories of discrimination. Your case has opened a door." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes justice took unexpected paths. Reynolds had lost his job, but the bigger impact was just beginning. A nationwide conversation about police reform, accountability, and the true meaning of protecting and serving all citizens equally. 6 months after the incident that changed everything, Special Agent Sarah Marshall stood before a packed congressional hearing room in Washington, D.C. Her testimony about her experience had captured the nation's attention, but today wasn't just about what happened to her. "Distinguished members of Congress," Sarah began, her voice clear and confident. "I'm here today not just as an FBI agent who experienced racial profiling, but as a voice for countless others who have faced similar discrimination without the protection of a badge." In the audience, former Officer James Reynolds watched the hearing on his small TV, now working as a night security guard at a local warehouse. His life had changed dramatically. No pension, no badge, and facing ongoing legal challenges. The district attorney had filed civil rights violation charges against him, and he was looking at possible jail time. Back in Atlanta, the police department had undergone major changes. Under newly promoted Captain Martinez's leadership, they had implemented strict new policies on bias training and accountability. Every officer now wore body cameras that couldn't be turned off during interactions with the public. "Our investigation in Memphis yielded unexpected results," Sarah continued her testimony. "While we lost precious time due to the incident in Atlanta, the publicity actually helped us. Citizens came forward with new information, leading to the largest trafficking bust in FBI history." The committee members leaned forward with interest as Sarah explained how her team had tracked down the trafficking ring. They had not only caught the original suspects, but uncovered a network operating across 5 states. Over 50 victims had been rescued. "Sometimes," Sarah said, looking directly at the cameras, "what seems like a setback can lead to even greater justice." In another part of Atlanta, Mrs. Peterson, the neighbor who had made the original call about Sarah, now led a community watch program that focused on building bridges between residents and law enforcement. She had learned a valuable lesson about her own prejudices. "We've made significant changes." Captain Martinez testified next, joining Sarah at the hearing. "Every complaint is now thoroughly investigated. Officers undergo monthly bias training, but most importantly, we're building trust with our community." The hearing room screens showed statistics. Complaints of racial profiling in Atlanta had dropped by 60% in just 6 months. Other cities were now adopting similar reforms, using Atlanta's new policies as a model. Sarah's phone buzzed quietly, another message from her team. The last member of the trafficking ring had just been arrested in Texas. Their case was finally complete, with all suspects in custody. But our work isn't finished, Sarah continued. What happened to me was not unique. The only unique part was that I had a badge to protect me. We must ensure that every citizen, regardless of their position or background, receives equal treatment under the law. As she spoke, news channels across the country carried her testimony live. In police departments nationwide, officers watched, some uncomfortable, others nodding in agreement. Change was happening, slowly but surely. Back in her office later that day, Sarah looked at a photo on her desk, her FBI Academy graduation picture. Next to it sat a new frame containing a letter from a young black girl who wrote that she now wanted to become an FBI agent, inspired by Sarah's story. Agent Marshall, Assistant Director Chen entered her office, smiling. Great testimony today, but I think you'll be even happier about this. He handed her a file. Remember those trafficking victims we rescued? 3 of them are now working with the FBI as civilian consultants, helping us understand and prevent these crimes. Sarah smiled, realizing how things had come full circle. What started as a horrible day of discrimination had led to positive changes she never expected. That evening, as she drove home, Sarah passed the Buckhead neighborhood where everything had happened. The house that once held dark secrets was now a community center, offering support services to trafficking survivors. Her phone rang, another interview request, this time from a police academy wanting her to speak to their new recruits about bias and proper procedure. She agreed immediately. Every opportunity to create change was worth taking. The sun set over Atlanta as Sarah thought about everything that had happened. One incident of bias had exposed deeper problems, but it had also sparked real change. Justice had come in many forms, not just punishment for wrongdoing, but positive changes that would help prevent similar incidents in the future. Sometimes, she realized, karma worked in unexpected ways, turning negative events into catalysts for positive change.